Welcome to actually this isn't a part of the webinar series. This is a special webinar with Luke and Lucian and Shuli to talk about the value of open source in the energy sector. My name is Jeffro. I will be running the webinar today. What you can do as a participant, if you have any questions during the webinar, you can look over and find the question and answer box and send a question, and I'll be able to field it. And if it's something that they can answer right away, I will go ahead and let them know, and then I can also unmute you. And I think that might really be it. If you need to reach out to me, go ahead and do so on the chat. I will be watching. And you can also raise your hand. There's a little button that says raise hand. Looks like we got our first question already. Yes, this webinar will be recorded. In fact, I believe the recording is on now. I'll make sure of that. And we will, there won't really be any slides to speak of. We've got a display slide right now just to make so that everybody knows they're in the right place. But the speakers will be on video shortly. So I will go ahead and I've answered that live. And now everybody should see it as the answered question. That's a really good demonstration of the Q&A box. So, Shuli, how are you doing? Are you about ready?
Yeah, I've given up with my headset, and I'll just be broadcasting live all over the house for everyone to hear.
Okay, well, I'm sure they will appreciate that as much as we will.
I have a full house of family from 14-year-olds to 93-year-olds, so still in the middle of summer. I'm very happy to be doing this, and this is a great group, 32 attendees. I'm absolutely thrilled by that, and it is a great honor to be doing this with Luke Bakker from TenneT and Lucian Balea from RTE. These two guys are, you know, not only do I learn an enormous amount from them, but their steadiness and their presence and being able to initiate and bring to their organizations change is, I find, thrilling and exciting. So are we going to move, you know, what we were thinking is that we would actually show ourselves, and rather than it just being like a talking head so that you guys can see us, because we very much want this to be there we go. I just started my video. Hi.
Hi, there we are.
My hair is terrible. What can I say? But look here. It looks like you have a transmission system behind you.
I do, actually. It's not a real one, but it's just a picture.
That's great. And Lucian looks like he's more in a white room with...
I have a blank page behind me, but we can feel it during the meeting.
That's great. So thank you both really very much for joining me today. And I think that what Jeffro said is that, you know, if you have questions, please put it into the chat box or raise your hand. You know, we want to make this interactive, and we want to give everybody the opportunity to participate in the conversation. And we also want to let, you know, Luke and Lucian actually get some of their thoughts out. So the first thing that I wanted to do is to really give you each the opportunity to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your roles and a little bit about your organizations at the highest level to set a context.
Okay, shall I start? Well, like you mentioned, thank you for introducing Shuli, and it's really exciting. This is my first webinar I ever do, so please attendees bear with me. I'm actually the manager of the CIO office at TenneT. TenneT is a Dutch and German transmission system operator. So we're the sole system operator, transmission system operator in the Netherlands, and one of 4 in Germany. We have approximately 4,500 employees in total within TenneT, of which 350 are in IT. We have 41 million customers, end customers in the Netherlands and Germany. So basically what we do is we supply electricity to those 41 million customers. And the IT organization that we have, what we do with 350 people, is we have really a distinction between plan, build, and run. And within the IT organization, it's my responsibility to lead the team that's responsible for the plan. So everything from strategic planning, information management, architecture, IT security, project management, and portfolio management is within my department. If I look at how we are organized, then we have, I think, a more what we call a bimodal way of working. So we are combining the agile way of working with a more traditional way of working within TenneT. And we also combine custom development with implementing packages. So it's not that we're only developing software or only implementing packages. We actually do both to serve our business. And we also are not only doing agile or only doing traditional way of working. We try to combine both. And I think open source for us as TenneT is really important for the custom development part. And that's also one of the reasons we've actually grown tremendously in the past period with doing our own custom development. That's really where open source has become a factor of importance for us.
Thank you very much, Luke.
Okay.
Lucian?
So hi, everybody. Like Luke, it's my first webinar as well, but I guess it will be fine. So I'm Lucian. I'm with RT, the French power transmission operator. I'm working there as R&D program director and managing the open source strategy and the open source office. So maybe a few words about RT as well. We are, like TenneT, operating mainly developing the power transmission grid. Our role is to provide cheaper, safer, and cleaner access to electricity. And like like a lot of grid operators in the world, we are confronted today to the energy transition and also to changes in the societal changes in the use of electricity. So for that, RTE decided in order to meet those challenges, new challenges, to rely on a stronger digitalization of the power grid. And for that, we are investing a lot both in R&D and in software development. So we have more than 100% working on R&D projects at RTE. And we are in the process of recruiting more developers. We are also contracting a lot and purchasing a lot of IT. So we are trying to have a mixed approach to software development.
Thank you very much, both of you. I'm going to briefly introduce myself. So my name is Shuli Goodman, and I'm the Executive Director of Linux Foundation Energy. LF Energy is a project I went to the Linux Foundation about 3 years ago in December, and I said, I'm looking for Switzerland. And what I meant by that is that I wanted someplace neutral where we as a community globally could work together in a leveraged and collaborative development model to be able to solve the digital foundations for the grid of the future. And I think that what I didn't really recognize at the time, maybe I was being way too aspirational, was that it was how it really is a fundamentally new paradigm to be able to think of critical systems, infrastructure, like electricity and power systems, and the digitization of it, and and open source. And so, initially I would speak to people about open source, and they would talk about it being dangerous. And I think that there was not a lot of awareness about how open source could play a foundational role, And I think that even sometimes I felt that people didn't quite understand what the digitalization of energy was. And I think in part it's because the control paradigm has been such a fundamentally, it is so foundational to how we think about electricity, that to shift to a distributed energy paradigm in which there are assets that may not be controlled, but that are both loads or resources, over the course of their lives, really provides a completely new paradigm. So what I can say is that Lucian and I first started talking to each other, I think in December of 2016. And he and his colleague, Gabriel Barreau, basically said, we have a vision, and that vision is of open source. And they brought me to Paris in March of 2017, in which they announced to all of their vendors that they were going to move to open source. The reason why I give this history is that it takes time to plant seeds for them to begin to come to fruition. And I feel that now, having RTE and TenneT together as two of the largest European TSOs is a kind of turning point in terms of being able to share with your other TSO colleagues, of which many are on this video conference. And so we really wanted to take the time to give you an opportunity to tell your story, and for you to be able to speak directly to your colleagues, in a very direct way, and to each other. And so that's kind of was the inspiration for this. So the place that I'd like to start is I'd like to ask each of you, when did you realize, or what was it that helped you to realize that you needed to consider a different path besides either purely proprietary or purely, you're going to go off and do this yourselves? When did you realize either that this problem was bigger than what you could solve alone, or that open source actually held a key for you? And Luke, do you want to start, and then we'll go back and forth?
Yeah, I can briefly say something about it. Actually, it was, I think, we had in 2016, we restarted one of our biggest programs we have within TenneT to actually rebuild our market management system. For a TSO, a market management system is probably one of the most important systems next to the SCADA EMS system. And we decided to step away from implementing it with packaged solutions, instead to develop the software ourselves. And that was the moment when, as IT organization and as TenneT organization, we decided that we had to build up this capability to develop software, and also to develop this in a more agile way, to have Scrum teams and to have DevOps teams developing this functionality. And with these teams, new technologies and new, technologies that were quite unusual for TenneT came in. So it was really more or less driven by engineers that we got, by software engineers that we got accustomed and used to using open source. And that actually accelerated in 2017 when we were setting up our program to develop a data platform for the whole of TenneT, where we found out that the existing solutions from commercial vendors were not sufficient anymore for us, that we needed to have more advanced, more innovative solutions that the traditional vendors had trouble with delivering to us. And we needed also to have some more flexibility and some more freedom in the types of solutions we were using there. And that actually was for us the moment when we wanted to accelerate the program for the TenneT data platform, to make a strategic decision to adopt open source technology and open source software.
Great story. Thank you. Thank you. Lucian?
On our side, so RT has been confronted to open source, but mainly as a user of open source for many years now, especially in some R&D projects that aim at developing our own software. And at that time, we also tried to push open source mainly in European R&D projects. But we did not have like a structured and strategic approach to open source, and we did not realize at that time that the industrial potential of open source. And then I think it was, so not in 2016, but 2017, so 2 years ago, that first of all, we looked at our digitization roadmap. And despite the fact that we are one of the TSOs that have some internal resources to do the digitalization of our business, we realized that we would need a tremendous accelerator to fulfill this roadmap. And then progressively we realized that maybe open source, looking at what happened in other industries, maybe open source could be this accelerator. And that's where we decided to have open source as one of the key elements of our digitalization strategy. And not only from the IT R&D perspective, but covering both R&D projects, IT projects, OT projects.
Wow. Okay. So when you started to think about this as being a direction, how did you begin to educate yourselves? How did you learn about open source? And you know, I'm gonna actually go to you, Lucian, because you all did something pretty radical.
Yeah. In fact, so our first step was quite obvious. It was getting competence on licenses and compliance, and that's the first step that usually a company goes through. And then we have been assisted by a local consulting company that is called the InnoCube, and that helped us to understand this first step. And once we reached this step, the second question was, okay, but what about governance? How to build community? We realized that it would not be sufficient just to put our code on GitHub and ask third parties to join us to have an efficient approach. And then we had the opportunity we got into contact with the Linux Foundation, and we had the opportunity to do a study tour with, it was 17 people from RT joining us from various departments. So it was a really great experience because we met the most important projects hosted at the Linux Foundation, and we could benefit from their experience. And maybe, so for instance, one of the projects that seemed relevant to us at this stage was the ONAT project. So the ONAT project, well, in short, so it's a project that has been launched initially by AT&T and China Mobiles, and so in the networking and telecom sector. And these companies were confronted to the need for an increase of the transmission capacity of their telecom networks, especially due to the emergence of 5G, for instance. And they decided to rely on the virtualization of the network functions to meet these challenges. And instead of doing each their own, or building each their own solutions, they partner within the Linux Foundation, and they build what is called ONAP. And this, I think today it's a really successful project. And why am I mentioning the ONAP project? Because we found some kind of analogies with our sector. We are talking about grids that have to make significant investments, that have to deal with legacy investments, legacy software, but also grid infrastructures that are confronted to a change in the ecosystem, a change coming from outside, and that need to adapt rapidly. So this was maybe one of the most convincing experience that confirmed that it is the right way to go.
That's great. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question in a second, but I'd like to find out from Luke. So, like, how did you educate yourself? How did you go, oh, this is a really interesting perspective?
Yeah, well, actually, in the introduction, I told that at the TenneT IT, we have about 350 people, and a quite large portion of these people are external people. And as soon as we started developing our own software for the market management system and also for the TenneT data platform, we had a lot of external people coming in. And what really struck me there was that all those people were talking, they brought in all this knowledge about open source components. They were all speaking about stuff like Kafka, like Cassandra, like Hadoop, all the big stuff that we use for big data. And nobody was speaking about the traditional solutions anymore. But we learned a lot, I think, from our external employees as well, and they brought in a lot of knowledge. And what I really appreciated and liked about it, it gave some kind of buzz in our IT organization, because there was something new happening. And also our own engineers that we have internally and software architects, in their spare time, they educated themselves also in all this open source stuff that is really accelerating at the moment. And what we did actually, we had a lot of reference visits also on the management level, also to educate the management level and the board level. And we read a lot of stuff from the analyst firms, and we had a lot of talks with organizations that were further than we are about open source. And that actually was for us also gave us a very good insight that it can actually support us in innovation, and that it's not only another way to procure or actually to acquire software and to deliver functionality to our business, but also to accelerate innovation, like Lucian was mentioning. So that really opened, well, a lot of new opportunities for us.
Well, what I'm really struck with is that you both had to go on a learning journey, and that you didn't necessarily have peers that you could learn from. You had to go outside and learn from others in order to be able to then take it and bring it inside and kind of integrate it. And I think that that's the hallmark of people who are way out on the innovation curve. And I think that what we're trying to do here, as LF Energy becomes more mature and the projects become more mature and end users actually begin defining what they want to work on, that it becomes possible that now you all can talk, to your peers and share. And so one thought I have is that I think it would be really great to add to any. We have a resource page on LF Energy that you all can go to, in which we provide links. But if there are other things that aren't on there that you all found interesting, I think it would be great to add that. So Lucian, when you were talking, here's the thought that came to me. I think that some of the vendors, the incumbent vendors, have this has been, open source is somewhat problematic because there is a feeling that it is going to hurt their old products, and they're not completely sure how they're going to make this into a business model. I think that the example of LF networking and ONAP is very interesting because, initially, Cisco and Ericsson and Nokia were afraid. But then they eventually jumped on board. And I think that you can look at their quarterly earnings and you can see that it has not been bad for business. In fact, it has been very good for business. And I think a lot when we talk about the energy transition, we talk about trillions of dollars being invested in grid modernization. Is open source and being a vendor, how do you see those things working together? How do you imagine working with your vendors? How do you see working with Siemens and GE and Schneider Electric on the incumbent side and new vendors?
Right. So of course, we understand we understand that there is some caution from the vendor side, and that it also requires some business model shifts, like the current business model does not necessarily fit with open source. But what we are saying is that, first of all, we are an end user and an industry that has high stakes in terms of reliability and quality of service. That means that we will never just pick open source from the communities and use it internally if we do not have the guarantee of mastering it and being able to provide the support needed and maintenance and correcting bugs and cyber security patches, etc. And there are two ways to do that. So either we get competence internally, but then we would need to hire people and invest in understanding each project, which would probably not be efficient. So we are investing on some topics, but because we believe that we have some knowledge and expertise and efficiency on those, but for sure this is not the majority of the IT that we are using. So we will need services, and the companies that will be able to provide those services to us in the future will be those that master technically the solutions, that participate to the open source communities. So there will be a business in contributing to these projects, because those companies will be able to sell us the integration support maintenance services. And what we also have to take in mind is that the budget for digitalization, the grids, is increasing. It is increasing at RT, it is increasing at TenneT, I'm pretty sure. Look can confirm, and it's increasing in Europe and probably worldwide. So the cake will not be smaller, I would say.
Luke, you want to? How are you thinking about your vendors and the role of open source with your vendors?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we speak about open source lately quite a lot with our vendors, and the good news is that a lot of our vendors are actually expressing that they have also embraced open source. And actually, I think it was one of the sales reps from one of our key vendors that recently told me that in about 70% of all the products, it's basically under the hood, it's mostly open source. So I think it's something, a movement that's unstoppable. And I always, when I speak to my board or senior management about this, I always have the example of Microsoft that has turned around completely their opinion and their how they think about open source. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, it was like you would get fired if you spoke about open source in a Microsoft building about it, and now they've embraced it as well. And I think it's a good example of that a lot of companies and also the big vendors have experienced that we can really move forward also as an industry when we adopt open source because of the open innovation possibilities that it delivers.
That's great. That's great. So, you know, one of the things that people talk about a lot is around interoperability, and sometimes I feel like when people are talking about it, they are thinking, well, this problem has never been solved before. Interoperability. What is interoperability? And when you think about the internet and the degree of plug and play about so many consumer products and all kinds of things, there's kind of inherent and embedded interoperability. Do you think that open source can help? And in particular, I do want to draw the distinction between, projects that are on GitHub. They're, I don't know, 160 million or 60 million projects on GitHub. When I think about LF Energy and I imagine where we are in 5 years or 10 years, we may have, 20 incubating projects and, 20 sandbox projects, but there may only be 5 to 10 projects that become kind of the core infrastructure of the grid of the future. What do you think the role of open source and interoperability is, or how can LF Energy help solve interoperability issues? Like, how are you thinking about that? Luke?
Yeah, I think interoperability, it's a difficult topic because it's more about open standards. And I do not have any factual evidence for that, but I do have the impression that the open source community in general is quite in favor of using open standards when available. And I think the example you mentioned about the internet and about plug and play, I find open standards at least as important as open source software. And open standards, I think, will have a chance to really make it, or an open standard, if it's simple and if it's if it can be easily applied. I think that's one of the strengths of, for instance, the IP protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And if we managed together to get standards like that, open standards like that, I think it will be easier to create interoperable software and platforms than it is maybe today. And I think it's a challenge for all of us, developing software to actually also incorporate open standards, and also to demand from our vendors that they adhere to open standards if they are available for the use case we have at hand.
Mm-hmm. Lucian, anything you want to add about interoperability?
Yeah, I can confirm. Well, that's one of the lessons of the study tool that we made. So, and discussing with Arpit Joshipura, who is managing LF networking. So his message was that intrinsically, open source collaboration, they force to have more modularity, that interoperability is already baked in because all the ecosystem can anticipate it. And also what they've noticed that is also interesting is that the release time cycles of projects have decreased with open source. So going from, they said, from 2 years to 6 months. So all these combined, interoperability, modularity, and reduced release time cycles. This is really interesting for us, especially in the context of fast changing environment, because today we don't know what we will exactly need in 10 years from now. So being able to do small steps but fastly is also a way to mitigate the risk of having inadequate IT in the future. So that's a real advantage and benefit that we expect from open source, besides leverage development models that everyone has in mind.
I want to go towards talking about business cases, but I want to do a follow-on question about this, which is about data models, because recently I was asked about, AI and energy, and my observation is that we're still pretty early when you think about where we're going to be in 10 or 20 years from now. And that part of the issue is around data models and how we can kind of marry multiple data models to be able to leverage it for machine learning. And so I'm kind of curious, like, how are you each looking at data and both in the present and then moving forward into the future, and as kind of, I think a really, it's kind of where the rubber hits the road when you talk about interoperability is around data. And so I'm wondering, how are you thinking about that?
Well, if I can answer that, I think the interoperability on the data models is probably one of the biggest challenges we have in the cooperation and the collaboration between parties in the industry, actually, because I know there have been, and there's still attempts, for instance, with the common information model to set this as a standard. And when we speak to other parties and we discuss this internally and we speak about this with vendors, everyone says, yes, we truly support the idea of the common information model. But for some reason, it's very difficult to actually implement it and to actually use it and to actually make sure that we achieve data interoperability with it. So I don't have the solution for that, but I think I fully agree with you that we're still quite early there, and that this is one of the toughest cases we have to crack together to really make sure that we have some interoperability, at least among TSOs and DSOs.
Yeah, I mean, when people talk about the TD interface, you know, really what we're talking about is how the transmission system communicates with the distribution system and everything above it and below it. And so the interoperability becomes really critical with regards to the data model. And, you know, doing it in a standards body, it's almost as if we have to actually begin doing some very rapid iterative design, you know, using open source and data. And I think that my hope for the OEDI project, the Open Energy Data Initiative, is that it will become a place where we can actually begin doing that. Lucian, how are you all looking at that? I mean, you and I have had some conversations about AI and the data model issues.
Yeah, so I fully agree with what has been said regarding data models, and also the fact that standardization is a slow process and it's really complicated, and sometimes the result is a compromised result, which then has to be interpreted and will result in many implementations of the same standard that are not plug and play interoperable, which is an issue. So having reference implementations that can go faster and then become de facto standards, or maybe precise how a standard should work in a specific area, can be an accelerator for so one example is the 61850 data model for the digital substation. And at RT, we had to draft our own interpretation model so that we can have something that is interoperable between all our suppliers. But we are doing that, and the traditional way of doing that would be we draft this and we keep it for ourselves. Then maybe TenneT will do the same, and then in the end, the suppliers complain also because they need to adapt their products for RT standard and for TenneT standard and for all standards. That's not really efficient. So that's one side. But then there is another aspect of data, which is open data and how to accelerate the sharing of data. And that's also something that we are strongly, we are investing a lot in open data. So we have built an open data platform with the gas TSOs in particular. And that's also an area where we see a lot of open data initiatives popping up. But then at some point of time, people will need a way to understand the different sources and try to harmonize things so that algorithms, analytics could run on mixed databases. And that would be the challenge, how to combine data published by RT with maybe some relevant data that would come from another party, and understand what it means, and with this combination have something that has value. A lot of things to be done there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, sometimes people ask a lot, you know, they want to know how, you know, I don't even know how to sell this to my management. You know, part of, you know, I feel like I came in and you had already sold it within RT, you had already sold it. And I feel like I watched from afar, Luke, as you did that internally. And so I was wondering if each of you could talk a bit about the business case and how you have structured that. And whether, the second question, which you can kind of see where to put it, is there a different argument that to be made with developers, with middle management, with, you know, your executive board, And how did you frame those conversations? Because my guess is that there are a lot of people on the call who are in other TSOs and DSOs that are really wanting to know, how do we frame this? And so that we can work with our management in order to be able to, I mean, this may be a very English, American way to say it, but to get a hall pass so that you can get out of the classroom and go and play together. Because I think that that's what we're trying to do, is to create something new. And so we have to be able to get out of the old in order to be able to get into the new. How did you frame the business case?
Okay, well, I must tell up front, so, and I hope I won't disappoint anyone who's expecting me to give a very detailed business case, financial business case, but basically what we did within TenneT, we didn't have a very, how do you say it, complex business case. What we did is we had a quite thorough trend analysis, and for those attendees in the call, our open source strategy is completely available on the LF Energy website. So we've open sourced our strategy. We did a trend analysis. We really worked from outside in, and we also had a very good look at the renewed strategy that we have within TenneT. And we came to the conclusion that actually what we try to achieve with open source and what open source can bring us as TenneT actually fits very well with our renewed strategy. That was for us the key thing that we did to convince our senior management and board to do this. And basically, we explained to our board and to our senior management that we want to adopt open source more for 3 reasons. The reason I already mentioned about open innovation and to drive the energy transition. We truly believe that we can speed up delivering solutions to our business that can help the energy transition by using open source and also by becoming a part of the open source community. Second of all is that we also expect, and we didn't have a very lengthy calculation or whatever for that, but that open source offers the opportunity to actually lower the costs that we are having to develop our own software. Because some things we just don't have to develop ourselves, but we can take something from the open source community, develop further upon it, and then probably give it back, or we can actually only speed up by consuming open source. And since we are completely financed by the Dutch government, this is one way we want to lower the cost for society, which is also one of the strategic goals of TenneT. And last but not least, I think by having an open source strategy and also by approaching it more from a strategic perspective, we will stay compliant, because without knowing it, we were already using quite a lot of open source technology and open source solutions within our IT landscape. And by increasing the knowledge about it and to make sure that we stay on par and that we update and we upgrade in timely fashion, we want to also stay compliant. So those are basically the 3 key reasons that how we convinced our senior management and board that we have to embark on open source.
That's great. That's great.
And we didn't have to convince our developers, because they love it.
Okay, great. There are a bunch of questions that are in there, and so I just want to follow up very specifically. So David Ziegler asked the question, did your testing efforts or costs in your development processes, have they raised, have they increased or decreased? And did costs redistribute themselves when you're looking at it in terms of internal, external, how do the finances move around?
Can you start about it, Lucian?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I fully understand the question, but so the distribution between internal and external, maybe it's too early to say, because we are starting. It's a quite young, I would say it's a young initiative. However, what we expect is that until now, we had to decide whether we would do it internally or externally, and this would be two separate worlds. So with weak interconnections, weak interactions. So with open source, we also think that this will enhance, so that we will be able to focus on what we consider our core expertise and then outsource in an easier way the rest. So that may change a little bit the ratio. And then the beginning of the question was
did the testing effort or costs and have your costs gone up or gone down?
Good question. And it's also there is a small overhead cost in the short term, and that's also one of the challenges is that we had to adapt the roadmap of the existing projects that have been initiated without the open source strategy in mind. And of course, there is some small overhead costs, so that the projects need to prepare to open source collaborations and interactions with the community. However, although this is an increasing cost in the short term, we also believe that this would be good practices in the medium long term for the project. So one example is a better documentation, more transparent conversations between the developers. So they need to explain, to discuss what they want to do, etc. And what's interesting to notice is that there is a concept called inner sourcing that is growing up, and some companies realize that even where they do not want to go open source, by just applying open source practices to their internal project, that can lead to more efficient projects. And they realized that by looking at, like asking themselves, how can it be that there are projects like the Linux, kernel, etc., that are successful while coordinating thousands of developers in every part of the world, and that sometimes internal projects do not manage to deliver while they are supposed to be simpler. So this extra cost in the short term is also a good practice to have something more efficient in the medium term.
Yeah, I do recognize that there is some ramp-up costs because you have to, of course, people have to educate themselves, and maybe at the beginning some things will take a bit longer to get accustomed to some new technologies. But I think if you approach this merely from a financial perspective, and if you do not look for other strategic benefits to embark on open source, then well, I would maybe reconsider it if it's the right moment, personally. It's not only financial. Yeah,
it's not only financial; it's strategic. And it's. I mean, I think of speed, and I think of security, knowing what's inside. There was a study that came out that Black Duck and Synopsys did, in which they ingested an enormous amount of software from the energy and renewable energy worlds, power systems worlds, and they discovered that 100% of it had open source inside. So it's not that we're not using open source, it's that we are not using it in a way that's around compliance, which I think you brought up earlier, in which we actually developed the capacity to know what's inside and to be able to ensure that patches are made, that we contribute back upstream. So, you know, I think that the process is, you know, it's cheaper, faster, more secure, but that there are ramp-up costs. And it occurs to me in this conversation that what I would really love is to maybe do a follow-on conversation that is specifically around building and creating an open source software program management office. And what are the operational and organizational requirements in order to be able to, upskill your workforce and attract new folks. I don't know whether you want to take, I'm looking at the time, and we have a little bit of time. So maybe you want to just take a couple of minutes to talk about what your internal process has been around upskilling and attracting new folks.
Yeah, I can. It's also part of our strategy, and it's actually one of the streams we have in our strategy is to set up a body or a board or whatever you would like to call it, to actually do the governance around open source adoption within TenneT. So basically, that's made up of not only IT but also legal is part of that. Our procurement department is part of that, and also our HR department should become part of that. They're not part of it yet, but they should become part of it, because I think those are the most important aspects that we are touching with introducing open source within TenneT on a strategic level. Procurement I mentioned because what we noticed when we were setting up our strategy and when we were investigating how we wanted to proceed is that a lot of our current processes are very much focused on the traditional software vendors and also on European tendering. And somehow that didn't seem to fit very well with the way we have to attract talent, but also the way we have to introduce new technologies. And well, it sometimes even made our procurement department a bit nervous. If we were talking about open source, okay, guys, how is this going to fit within European tendering rules? Because that's really we're quite strict about that for a reason. So that was really one of the challenges that we had to overcome, and that we still have to overcome. And that's something that we, in the first phase of our roadmap for open source strategy, it's something we will focus on.
Okay.
To really settle this with procurement. And the good point is that our procurement department also supports the strategy, so they're very supportive, and I really appreciate that. But that we have to, they want to look for a solution with us.
That's great. So it's not only that you're recognizing you need the external governance, but in terms of TenneT to RTE to utilities in the United States or Asia or whomever. I mean, because I think we envision this as being a global effort. So there's the need for the governance around the technical projects. But I think what you're saying is that each organization also needs to have its own internal governance in order to be able to coordinate the various objectives and agendas of your internal folks, your procurement, your legal, your developers, your business strategy. So that's really, really great point. Lucian, anything you want to add to that?
And so we have the same vision, and we have set up an open source office. I think there is a lot of material on the Linux Foundation website. I think the key challenge is that we are not Google or Microsoft in terms of staffing of the IT department, so we need to find something efficient at our scales, and so the things to be adapted to fit the open source strategy is everything related to compliance, to development practices and sharing good practices in terms of code documentation, code writing, etc., etc. And procurement. Well, procurement. So we have not identified procurement as a blocking issue, but something that needs to be adapted. And also, I think it's also important from the perspective of our vendors that, so we are doing calls to join our open source project, but then it should also be aligned with the standards that the vendors will see in the future. They need consistency in these messages to get prepared to adapt their portfolio product. So that's we are working on that, and we foresee that in the future we will be a bit more prescriptive or maybe even much more prescriptive regarding usage of open source in the products or services that we will buy.
Mm-hmm. Daniel Lazaro asked this question about certification and in-house development, and something that that the Linux Foundation has addressed on numerous occasions, which is how do you actually get to certification? And you know, are we moving towards certification of energy-related projects within LF Energy? And I think that the answer is kind of at an aspirational level, it's yes, but it also really has to do with you all in the utility community, which is that you know, do you find it important to ensure that your vendors actually are certified in particular software? Now, I don't know that that software is in LF Energy today. I think it will be in LF Energy in a week, you know, in a year or in 6 months or in 2 years, that will become kind of the critical platform for instance, managing the transmission distribution interface. And that the progression within the Linux Foundation is that we create training on the software, and that that then creates compliance, and then from compliance you move to certification. So it's a march. Kubernetes did not launch with Kubernetes and then immediately go to cloud certification. You know, there was a process. So that, you know, to answer Daniel's question. But you know, I'm wondering, you know, how are you training your folks? How are you upskilling your people? Are you sending them to conferences? Are you having them take courses online? Are you looking for new developers that, you know, that are kind of open source literate? What's happening?
It's a combination of what you mentioned. We do invest quite significantly also in educating our developers, but also, like I mentioned previously, we bring in a lot of external people who have the skills and knowledge already that our people can learn from. And I think it's working quite well. And also we bring in other specialists that can educate our people, and attending conferences, but also, like Lucian already mentioned, reusing the material that's already on the LF Energy and the Linux Foundation website really helps us there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a few comments about certification. My feeling is that in our industry, compared, for example, with the avionics industry or automotive industry, we have not that much certifications per se. It's more about qualification. How do we qualify the products that we buy? So it's a less formal, I would say, formal process. Nevertheless, qualification takes a lot of time because we have to validate that the devices and the IT works in various configurations and it's really reliable, etc. So everything that can help to anticipate those kind of questions and to perform as much qualification test as possible within the community and have people trained to understand all this can help us a lot, and this would increase the efficiency. So I don't know whether it's like certifications involve some kind of liability which has to be thought about, while qualifications may be more appropriate to our business. And then regarding training, etc., same as Luke, we try to have diverse medias to train the people, and now we included into that material open source recently.
That's great. Well, I can also say that I think that one of LF Energy's core missions is to train and educate developers in energy-related, you know, in power systems. In November 4th and 5th, we're going to be in Paris, and on the 5th in particular, there's going to be there are going to be 3 different breakouts. One will focus exclusively on projects, including projects that are in the process of coming into LF Energy in Q4 and Q1 of 2020, and the ones that we have there now. But also we have Ibrahim Haddad, who works for the Linux Foundation and is, I think if you go out and you look at open source and program management and open source, he's probably one of the most prolific writers on open source. And Ibrahim is going to run a developer track that is going to talk about building an open source software program management office, DevOps, CI/CD, all the things that are really necessary for being able to do this internal management and being able to manage kind of a new cadence around release cycles. And the other area will be specifically at an operational level and a strategic level, and we'll address some of the IP issues and procurement issues, some of the things that Luke was talking about internal governance. So that will be directed more towards executives who are trying to manage kind of something that crosses multiple organizational silos. And then the third one will really be about, as I said, around programs, around the projects. What I was wondering if we could kind of, I'm trying to get to questions. I think I've answered a few of them. I'm wondering, what are your visions for LF Energy? And, if you could say something to your fellow TSO, DSO, utility, independently owned utilities, co-ops, however you want to put it, what would you say to them about LF Energy and what your aspirations and hopes are?
Okay, well, I think the reason for us to choose for LF Energy was on one hand that you're a complete independent platform, very much focused with a very strong focus on energy, and also the vast amount of experience you have as a Linux Foundation in setting up communities like this. But it only works if the community will grow, and I think, and this is also, and it's also one of the reasons why we decided, and it was very exciting for us as a company to open source our strategy. It will only work, I think, if more people will get involved, and I think the community will only get stronger the bigger it gets. And one of the things, and I like that, one of my teammates said about open source and about adopting open source, is that alone you go faster, but together you go further. And that's really something I would like to invite other people within the utility industry to also join this open source community.
Great, thank you. Lucian?
Yeah, so maybe, so first, in the short term, we have some plans, and we are actively working in the startup of new initiatives, especially in 2 fields, in the field of the digital substation and regarding asset monitoring. So these are short-term expectations in respect to LF Energy. But then I would also like to add that today you have 2 persons from TSO business that are talking, but I think that there is room in LF Energy for projects that would not necessarily be of interest for a TSO, but maybe that would concern a DSO or other parts of our industry. And that's also an opportunity for us as well, because then if LF Energy covers all the business chain, then we will have opportunities to develop projects at the interfaces. And for instance, the distribution transmission interface is one of the key interface for us in the future, and there are a lot of opportunities there. So this is also an invitation for distributors to join the initiative. And to add on that, we feel that there is a growing momentum around LF energy. And I think it's worth investing some time in understanding what happens there, from going through the projects, trying to use the code, etc., because these projects would most certainly could most certainly fulfill some future needs. And it's also, LF Energy, it's a quite young initiative. And I think that there is a great opportunity of being on the driving seat of a young initiative. That's also, at this early stages, a lot of important things happen and orientations are taken. So we are happy to be part of this.
That's great. That's great. I mean, we really are at the beginning. When I'm talking to the members and I'm talking to to folks, I remind them. I ask people to do a thought exercise to imagine 20 years in the future, or even 30 years in the future. Think about 2050. 2050 is such an important number with regards to decarbonization. And to imagine what it would be like to put yourself in 2050, how old you'd be, and what it would be like looking back in terms of how successful we were. And I truly believe, similarly, when I look back to where we were 20 years ago with the internet, let's say, that we are going to be successful. We are going to do this. We have this, but that we can only do it together. And so 2050 together is really my rallying cry, and we're very young and we have a lot of great software about to come in that I can't announce yet, but it's coming. And I think that we have really good DNA. It's like we have really great DNA. We were scheduled to go to 9:15 or to the quarter hour, and we still have over 20 people still on the line. I'm happy to open up a question or to open up the mics if people want to say anything. I know that there are a number of DSOs and TSOs on the line, as well as vendors, and would be very interested if anyone feels like coming forward. Just, Jeffro says, just hit raise hand and we'll unmute you. So I guess there's a, okay, well, is there anything that you guys want, if people find their way to the mic, that's great. Anything that you want to add in closing? Luke or Lucian?
No, I just, I really appreciate this opportunity to have this good open discussion, and I really hope that more of our colleagues will follow there, because I think we can learn a lot from each other as well.
Exactly, I fully share this call to join us, and you can also reach us after the meeting if you want to learn more.
Yeah,
I'm sure Shuli would make the link if needed.
So I don't know who David Ziegler is. Are you a utility person or a vendor person? You want to unmute David? Where is David? Not sure we can hear you.
He's on the train, he can't talk.
He can't talk, okay. Is he one of your guys? Because he asked a very particular question, which was about TSO-DSO interaction projects heading towards open source software. And we absolutely have, I just came from a meeting that is completely about the TD interface. And it's using software that's been developed both at the transmission level, at the distribution level, and also in the research world, to be able to have, integrate nodes into a data platform through substations and into control rooms. So it's pretty exciting. And I'm really hoping by December we're going to be able to talk about it. I haven't been able to figure out how to unmute, so I'm sorry, David. So I think I'm going to call it at this point, unless anybody else has anything to say. This, for me, has been really exciting, much better than doing a webinar where you're the only person talking and you have no idea what anybody's thinking. This has been really lovely, and I really thank you both for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all also for participating.
Thank you very much. And we will get back to you all with questions. And so we'll send something out afterwards, okay? Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.